Heroic spirits. Alright, let's get this out of the way. If you're here, then you obviously know what a heroic spirit is. But for all time's sakes, let's get it out of the way. A heroic spirit is a mythological, historical, or urban legend that can be manifested as what is essentially a JoJo stand with its own free will by one of 7 mages to participate in the Holy Grail War. Each mage, who will serve as the master of the spirit that is summoned, will each get 1. Typically, these servants appear in 7 different classes, those being Saber, Archer, Lancer, Rider, Assassin, Caster, and Berserker. Now you might be asking, what the fuck is a Holy Grail War? Okay, so the Holy Grail War is a war for the Holy Grail. What is the Holy Grail? It is a golden grail that manifests wishes and desires to the victor of the Holy Grail War, both the master and the servant. Or just the master, if the servant ends up dying, but they still somehow manage to clutch it. And typically, these wishes, from depending on the mage, will stem from something materialistic, or they're going to be thirsting for knowledge. Typically, these wishes will be in regards to something materialistic, such as wealth, immortality, charisma, getting girls to like you, blah blah blah. Not that that actually happens specifically, but you get the point. It's something materialistic, or it's a thirst for knowledge, with some mages wanting to reach the root. Which, as I mentioned in the Holy Church video briefly, the root is essentially the creation of all things within the Type Moon universe. That's the best way I can explain it. It's where Magecraft comes from, it's where everything comes from. They want to know everything by reaching the root. To understand the true magics, everything. Everything. Eventually, this grail got corrupted by a specific improper heroic spirit that was used to cheat. That one was Angra-Mainyu. Angra-Mainyu is an anal-loving demon. And that's not a joke. That's actually one of his stories. The name comes from a Zoroastrian, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, spirit associated with destruction and malice. He is referred to as all the world's evil. But what's interesting about Type Moon is that he's not exactly that. He is that, but not really. I like the way how Type Moon does this. Fuck you if you disagree. But essentially, they kind of deconstruct the idea of Angra-Mainyu actually being a demon. Because in Fate's lore, the person called Angra-Mainyu was originally just an ordinary villager, weak, insignificant, and powerless. His community needed something to blame for all the suffering, hatred, disaster, and sin, so they chose him as a sacrificial victim and labeled him as all the world's evil. That label became his identity. He was tortured, hated, raped, and eventually died carrying humanity's collective desire to place evil onto a single person. Look, I know this sounds crazy, but in Type Moon, belief and symbolism have metaphysical weight. Because enough people treated him as the embodiment of evil, the concept began to overwrite the man himself. And that's honestly fucking scary. Not because he started as a monster, but because humanity manufactured one. Which is, very fucking true. Humanity's fucking gay. So essentially what happened is that Angra-Mainyu was summoned in one of the Holy Grail Wars. So instead of summoning a famous hero, they summoned Angra-Mainyu as a extra class servant known as the Avenger class. And yeah, shit happened. That fucking war was bloody. So as a result, yeah, the Grail was fucking corrupted. And that explains the fucking hot mud that you see in the end of Fate Zero of all that pouring out. That is Angra-Mainyu's mud. And yeah, so that's the explanation of heroic spirits. Now, normally I would stop there, but I'm going to do something different in this video. Instead of talking about just heroic spirits, I am going to talk about the different classes of heroic spirits that exist. Starting with, technically not really a heroic spirit to begin with, the Counter Guardian. A Counter Guardian is essentially a person who made a contract with the world itself in exchange for power, survival, or the fulfillment of a wish. To explain it from the inside rather than as wiki terminology, the world in Type Moon is not passive. It has systems that try to preserve human history and prevent extinction level disasters. When humanity or reality drifts towards collapse, those systems react automatically. A Counter Guardian is one of those weapons those systems can deploy. The important thing is that Counter Guardians are not heroes in the romantic sense. They are closer to emergency cleanup units. So Jannies. They're cleaning up humanity's messes, or preventing it from spilling in the first place. For instance, if Israel needs to be nuked to prevent a planet-wide catastrophe, a counter-guardian may be sent to destroy it without hesitation. The counterforce does not care about morality, fairness, or innocence. It only cares about preserving the continuation of humanity and the stability of the world. That's why many counter-guardians are tragic figures. Most of them originally wanted to save people. They imagined becoming protectors, champions, or ideal heroes. But after death, they discover that the world uses them in brutal, utilitarian ways. Instead of preventing suffering, they are often summoned only after things have become irreversible. So like I said, Janny, really, you get so much emotional horror as a trade-off when becoming a counter-guardian. You gain the ability to save people, but you lose the freedom to choose how. And eventually, you stop being treated as a person at all. Now here's the important thing I should say. Heroic spirits, the cutoff for them is after World War I. So anything past World War I cannot be a heroic spirit, but they can become a counter-guardian. So anything from the past, present, or future, if they have unique feats and skills and accomplishments that ring true or similar to a heroic spirit, such as, maybe not Napoleon, but, something like Billy the Kid, for instance, right? Anything of that sort. If you have all these heroic feats, you can become a counter-guardian by a small marginal chance. Now with that being said, we move on to the next category of heroic spirit, a pseudo-servant. A pseudo-servant is a heroic spirit using a human vessel to manifest. One good example, Ishtar. Now, many of you who probably watched Fate Strange Fake, and that being your first anime, may think of Ishtar looking like this. Let's say you get very, very fucking horny for her and you want to look at art of her, but then you see her looking like this. And then you realize, wait a minute, that other one looks familiar. Isn't she the Unlimited Blade Works girl? And you'd be right. It is. Let me explain. A pseudo-servant, unlike heroic spirits who have their own physical bodies, pseudo-servants are typically beings of high divine powers. So like gods, divine beings. Think of all those things, right? Ishtar's case is that she is a Mesopotamian goddess, like a full-on god. And that would be way too overpowered in the playing field for many heroic spirits. Mostly. I say mostly because they're already kind of bullshit in terms of power levels. But that's honestly kind of funny, all things considered. So what these pseudo-servants will do, all these high divine beings such as Ishtar being a Mesopotamian goddess, is that they will typically be allowed to participate in these wars by possession. Meaning that the person who summons them, or another person, will be possessed by the goddess. I mean, it's also the fact that pseudo-servants originally were made for one thing and only one thing only when they first appear in FGO. Money.
Money! 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 Money!
I mean, look, it's not that fucking bad, I'll be honest. Although, there is some interesting points to be made about these two interpretations of Ishtar. The one in Strange Fake is possessing a homunculus, meaning that she is a blank slate. So, it is a perfect vessel for Ishtar to possess because it means that she can fully embrace her whole fucking personality without any pushback. She is sadistic, she wants to enslave humanity, blah blah blah, all those things. Whereas the one in Grand Order retains lots of Rin Tosaka's traits and morals. And it's also kind of useless in Fate Grand Order's story, which is funny. And now, we move on to the last one, which is very specific in Fate Grand Order. And who better yet to explain but John Grand Order's favorite girl. Look, it's Wife. Wife has a big ass. Wife is still not getting dick from fucking John Grand Order because he is a fucking cuck. Wife is what you would call a demi-servant. A demi-servant in type Moon lore is a human being fused with a heroic spirit while still remaining alive and conscious. Instead of a servant being fully summoned into an independent spiritual body, the spirit is anchored inside the human vessel and shares an existence with them. Sometimes the human remains dormant and simply borrows the servant's strength. Other times, the heroic spirit slowly reshapes the host's identity. And in unstable cases, the host risks losing themselves entirely and becoming more like the spirit inhabiting them. Now, you may be scratching your head and be like, wait, isn't that just a pseudo-servant? Would you just explain? No. A demi-servant is fundamentally a human being empowered by a heroic spirit. The human host is usually the core existence. The servant's power is fused into them, often artificially or through experimental means. So, in other words, wife got experimented on by the CIA, Mossad, and KGB all together having a sex orgy to her. So, like, in other words, the heroic spirit within the demi-servant isn't really there as a second consciousness that's piloting their body, but rather they're just there dormantly, but the powers are being used at will by the host, while again, being used as a fucking lab rat. But because all this thing is done artificially, it's typically very unstable for this to happen because humans are not normally built to contain servants, especially through experimental means done forcefully by artificial means. Whereas the pseudo-servant would kind of be technically the more natural way of it happening, where in their case the heroic spirit is usually the dominant existence, and the human body acts as a compatible container. And where unlike demi-servants, pseudo-servants are often relatively stable because their arrangement is closer to a proper summoning system rather than forcing a living human to evolve into a servant hybrid. Now I know they both sound similar, and maybe they still fucking do, but let me put it this way. A demi-servant is a human being turned into something beyond human, whereas a pseudo-servant is a myth borrowing a human face. Does that make sense? Does it? Yes? No? Maybe? I don't know. Here's Ishtar's feet. Have fun licking them off. All the dirt off for her fucking feet. If you're fucking into that. I don't fucking know. Alright? I gotta use the bathroom.
Excuse me, sir. There must be someone you've confused me for. If I could see someone who knew me or someone in uniform, I really don't belong here. I know you've heard the tune before. Screaming at the demons while they push them through the door.
Don't do it.
Oh fuck! Oh fuck! Oh fuck me.